We lean into the start. 3, 2, 1. Power motor ignition and liftoff. Liftoff of Challenger and the first flight of the satellite in space. We have cleared the tower.
When it comes to making decisions, man is in a class of his own. There is no substitute for humans where judgment, improvisation, and random intervention are required. The words are from a project report by the European Space Authority, or ESA. We may not be totally logical about making decisions, even in very simple situations. But when it comes to deciding under pressure, man is excellent at drawing on past experience, deriving simple rules from it, and applying them to the situation at hand. We even have a name for all of this. We call it common sense. Common sense is our ability to size up a situation in an instant and find a solution through our own intuition. It makes us more flexible, still, than machines. It means we are still superior. And it means we are still an indispensable part of the decision-making process. Some skeptics claim that common sense is not as common as we would like to believe. If we look at the mountains of material on misjudgments and bad decisions, they seem to have a point. In fact, the optimists and the cynics are both right. Whenever we are operating in a familiar environment, there's no reason at all why we should not use past experience as a guide. Common sense works. If it's a hot summer's day and the thermometer shows below freezing, it's a safe bet that the thermometer isn't working. We don't need elaborate test apparatus. We can use our common sense. But what happens when events lead us away from the territory we know so well? If the situation we are in is an unfamiliar one, our past experience will count for very little. Remember the story of the servant who asked the king if he could be paid in grains of rice? The servant took a chessboard and asked for 1 grain in the first square, 2 in the second, 4 in the third, and so on. Each square would have double the amount of the square before. A modest request, thought the king. So he agreed. Little did the king suspect that when they actually worked it all out, all the rice in his kingdom was not enough to fill the 64th square. What had happened? The king didn't have the experience to see what his servant was demanding, and his common sense had let him down completely.
If the king failed to analyze the situation, it was through carelessness. If we fail to do so in the cockpit, it's usually because of pressure of time. This may be one explanation for the strange approach made by one of our long-haul crews to a destination we all know well. It was night, IMC, and the end of a long and tiring flight. The crew of our wide body had just got themselves into a fast-moving lineup. The workload was high. The approach routine alone was quite an effort. The crew turned in to the localizer at 265 knots. But the navigation computer did not turn onto the ILS. Instead, and quite unexpectedly, it lined the aircraft up parallel to the proper track, but far outside the localizer. For the next few minutes, the situation was clearly too much for the crew's logic and common sense. The raw navigation data from ground installations was simply ignored for a very long time. It was the controller who realized the aircraft was not established on the localizer. He tried to help the crew. He let them exceed the minimum sector altitude by 1,500 feet, and he allowed them to descend to 1,500 feet above threshold. The autopilot now began a level off at the pre-selected 1,500 feet. But this was overruled by the vertical speed. Rate of descent now increased to 2,900 feet per minute. The ground proximity warning system came on for 10 seconds. The crew's reaction? They disengaged the autopilot and reduced the rate of descent slightly to 2,200 feet per minute. The flying pilot continued his approach far below the permitted radar minimum, in spite of the ground proximity warning, the localizer full-scale deflection, the glide slope undershoot of more than 2 dots, and the verbal interventions of the assisting pilot. Only when the localizer was crossed, clearly within the outer marker at an intercept angle of over 30 degrees, and with the aircraft at 702 feet radio altitude, was a go-around initiated by the assisting pilot.
The second approach was uneventful. Only now did the crew come to realize the extent of their navigation error. The explanation was simple. An error in the area nav computer had put the aircraft over 1 mile to the side of the ILS localizer. The computer's action, which was of course quite unexpected, had been enough to totally overload the human minds on the flight deck for a frightening length of time. The result had been a total breakdown in discipline. Flight rules had been broken. Policies had been totally ignored. Even the last resort, the ground proximity warning system, had only triggered a response after a considerable delay. Common sense is vital, but it does need support. Our policies and procedures are there to help us keep within certain limits. Limits within which our knowledge,
First, the poor old donkey can't decide. He runs from one pile to the other, but doesn't actually eat from either, and he starves to death. Maybe donkeys are a little smarter nowadays, but the old story still has some truth. In any decision-making situation, we will always feel drawn to the more pleasant option. Deciding to go for a swim is a nice decision to make. Other situations can seem a lot less attractive. They may involve something unpleasant, like the traffic jam we can expect to meet if we drive our car during the rush hour. We will try and avoid this, even if we have to make an elaborate detour to do so. But options can often seem attractive and unattractive at the same time. You want to go and see your favorite team play, but it just happens to be your partner's birthday. Do you go to the match and make her unhappy? Or do you stay at home to celebrate and miss the game? Decisions, decisions. Torn between the two. The kinds of situation a flight crew member can find himself in may be a lot more complex. There may be a number of alternatives, with plus and minus points for each one. Take a difficult approach in marginal weather conditions. Getting the aircraft down safely is a challenge to our professional abilities. After all, reaching our destination is part of our job. On the other hand, if the conditions really do become bad, we may be compromising the safety of the flight. The alternative is a go-around. That's the safer course. But we may still feel it's some kind of failure on our part. We may even see it as concrete proof of our own misjudgment. In this kind of ambivalent situation, we find it much harder to make a definite decision. We may hesitate. We may not be able to make one at all. We may jump back and forth between one alternative and the other. Let's look at this surprising conclusion to a flight. Our short-haul crew were flying a localizer approach.
Rate of descent 600, approaching minimum. Engage altitude hold, minimum.
Visual ground contact was established during level off at the minimum. Then there was a change of controls.
Contact, my controls. Flight director off.
Now on visual, the flying pilot descended below the 500-foot minimum. Suddenly, the crew lost visual contact with the ground. At 260 feet ground, a go-around was initiated, and the aircraft began to climb away. At that moment, the electronic flashing approach light system came into view. The flying pilot changed his decision and called out, "No, landing." The aircraft's nose was pushed down from 15 degrees attitude to 0, and the aircraft remained in landing configuration. The auto throttle set go-around power, but was manually overridden. The crew continued the descent. At 144 feet,
No further descent.
the assisting
Trees to the
pilot
right.
called out, "No further descent. Trees to the right." The nose was returned to a nose-up attitude of 11.5 degrees. The aircraft was now 350 feet above the middle marker, and N1 was at 85%. Again, the nose was dropped. After a steep dive, flare was initiated at V approach plus 20. The auto throttle system was still in go-around mode when the aircraft touched down.
Reverse.
Reverse is set.
Idle reverse.
Exactly how close this incident came to disaster may only be truly appreciated by the crew themselves. What is clear is that the unthinking decision reversal had pushed them into a dangerous area, an area where their common sense and their experience were no longer enough to guarantee the safety of the flight. Here, too, the situation would never have occurred if the crew had kept to established procedures.